Welcome back to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so grateful you've joined us. My name is Conrad Weaver, and I'm excited that you are here to be a part of this program today. And I'm also excited to announce that today's episode is sponsored by Central Square. Here's a little bit about them. Experience a revolution in public sector efficiency with Central Square. Our customized software for government agencies and cutting-edge advancements in public safety redefine streamlined operations and data-driven insights. Imagine equipping first responders with state-of-the-art tools for faster, more effective emergency responses. Central Square serves over 8,000 sector agencies. The best-run communities rely on Central Square. So go check them out. Thanks, Central Square, for sponsoring this episode. Well, today I have a former deputy sheriff, AK Dozanti, on the program. She's now a first responder coach and specialist, and she helps first responders manage chronic stress and regulate their nervous systems to prevent burnout and cultivate personal growth. You know, she had some experiences of her own, and that led her to her current life's mission to give back to all lifesavers. And today, she's my guest right here on the First Responder Wellness Podcast. Stay tuned for a deep and insightful conversation. This is episode number 37 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's the show where we talk about wellness and mental health within the first responder community, because I believe that wellness is not optional. Do you? If you want to prosper and thrive, and then wellness must be a priority for you and your team. My goal is on this show is to help you start that conversation. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcast or some other audio app, I want to invite you to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing and think others would too, subscribing helps us rise in the rankings. And we want to get this podcast out to more and more first responders around the world. So please hit that subscribe button and then share the show with your friend or colleague. And I promise you, I won't charge you anything for that. Thanks again for listening and watching. And now here's my conversation with AK Dozanti. Well, AK, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so glad we got to connect and have you on the program today.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be a rich discussion. I can feel it already.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about you. What's your connection to first responders?
Yeah. So when I was 19, actually, I started in my law enforcement career doing undercover online investigations. And I did that for a couple of years while I was doing my undergrad. And so I was an auxiliary. And then I went through the academy when I was 20. When I was 21, I started as a deputy sheriff and kind of did a whole gamut of things. I did court security, prison transports, but the bulk of my career was on road patrol on afternoon shift. So we were catching all the in-progress stuff, which was a lot of fun, mostly. And and then in 2015, I became Officer of the Year. And then by like September of that year, I was in a spirally crispy burnout. I was experiencing PTS, adrenal fatigue, depression, and suicidal ideation. And so I had to make a decision, and it was a tough one, but I had to leave full-time law enforcement. I became a criminal court victim advocate, did that for a handful of years. And during that time, I started to work on healing myself. And I went back and got my master's degree in victimology and started to learn about trauma and that it's not exclusive to victims. And I've done all kinds of different certifications and stuff, but in 2020, left that position. And in 2021, I formed Lifesaver Wellness. And now I coach individuals and do agency trainings and speaking engagements and stuff to educate first responders on how to manage the chronic stress and the trauma that we deal with.
What were some of those early symptoms that you had when you first started saying, well, something's not quite right with my mind or with my life?
Yeah.
What were some of those things that was happening?
Well, ironically enough, there were a lot of red flags, and of course I decided to ignore them. But a lot of them were things that I couldn't tie back to my own wellness. It was just, like mental fog and forgetfulness. I would show up um, to work and I had forgotten my weapon at home. Like that's a big, how do you forget
That's a
that?
big deal.
Your brain,
Right.
I just wasn't present in the moment. I couldn't be engaged. I was struggling to even write simple reports. So I was getting behind on things. I was feeling very shut down. I was feeling kind of out of my own body, if that makes sense. So in hindsight, I think I was maybe experiencing some depersonalization, derealization stuff. I was very, very hyper vigilant, very much on the high end, but I masked it very well. And, we usually we think that makes us very tactically sound, right? And ironically, now in hindsight, now that I know a little more about the science behind it, it was making me less tactically sound because I had blinders on and I was just so, not, like I said, not grounded in the moment. So those were just a few of the early signs. And then just, some reckless behavior because I just didn't care. There wasn't a sense of purpose. There was a short time where my moral compass was a little slanted and, I really had to get myself back on track.
Yeah. Do you think that this was kind of a result of, was it like a cumulative thing, or was it like a specific incident that kind of triggered some of this? Or
For me personally, I had dealt with a lot of loss in my upbringing, and I just didn't realize that could have had an effect on me. At 17, I lost my lifelong best friend to suicide, and I just don't think I ever dealt with it. I know that it had happened in May of that year, and then I don't remember anything from that summer until I went back to school in the fall. And so I know that it had a massive effect on me, but I think I just blocked it out and was, life goes on, right? I knew deep down that it was affecting me, but I never dealt with it. So then I, jump into a career that has lots of flavorful, stressors and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so it definitely for me was cumulative, but there were a few critical incidents along the way.
You were probably on some suicide scenes, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that probably brought back some of those things from your friend.
Certainly. And I actually, at least once, I feel like it might've happened even more than once, but, my sergeant and I actually responded to someone that was mid attempt and had to cut him down. And that certainly brought up a whole lot of stuff for me. So, yeah.
Yeah. So what was your process in kind of crawling out of that hole that you had dug yourself into?
First of all, I had to recognize that I was in a hole. I had, I think I had painted the walls of the hole like, oh, this is just, I'm just a deep thinker and I'm just this like mystic, unique person. And no, I was struggling. And so once I realized that I was not in a place where I wanted to be, I had betrayed a lot of my own personal core values, and I just wasn't in alignment with myself. I reached out and actually started expressing that. At first, it was just to my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and he was like, you don't have to live like this. This is not a life sentence. You can kind of reverse this. And then I just started chipping away at some of the peripheral issues. So, for example, when I left, I took about a month off, and I slept about 18 hours a day every single day for a month. that adrenal fatigue was hitting hard. So I let myself recover. I started doing some yoga, or getting back into it. And I actually did a 10-month yoga teacher training to become an instructor and understand my body more and learn how to listen to it and give it what it needs, whether it be rest or movement or nourishment or hydration, whatever. But just, it was very slow going, but it was really more about tapping into my compass and listening to what my body needed.
Mm-hmm. As you look back at your work in law enforcement, do you see perhaps there were others within your agency that were in the same place you were?
100%. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all kind of thought that we were like screaming for help, and it was really coming across as like a whisper. And, there were times where I would make a dark humor joke about myself, and people would laugh because it was funny. But underneath that, the undercurrent, it was very real for me, and I didn't know how else to express it. But I now see the similar things in the people that were my peers at the time. Definitely.
Why do you think it's so hard for people in law enforcement, especially, to kind of acknowledge some of these things and to deal with them?
I think it's a combination of things. I think that our culture has kind of made it very difficult. You're supposed to just be tough. You're supposed to be stoic. You're supposed to be the protector of everybody else. And so you're not allowed to crack. I think a lot of it is just misconceptions around what mental and emotional health is. I think that people think that it's soft and fluffy, and that we just let our feelings run amok and do whatever they're going to do. And in reality, it's the opposite. If you acknowledge them and say, hey, I see you there, have a good one. I'm going to acknowledge you, but I'm not going to let you override my logic. Then you can stay in the driver's seat logically and rationally. But people don't see it that way. They don't understand it yet. And I think it's just that idea of not wanting to be vulnerable. We're not taught that. We're not taught in the academy.
It's a sign of weakness. It's appeared as weakness, maybe?
Yeah, certainly. And because vulnerability is like the first thing we want to look for in somebody else, but it's the last thing we want people to see in us. And so we armor up and we carry our shields and block it out. So yeah, 100%.
I think in talking with first responders across the country, I think it takes more strength to really admit some of these things than it does to push it down and ignore it.
Yes. It's not easy work. And I think maybe deep down, some people know that and they're like, yeah, I'm not ready yet. And that's okay too. You just can't let it get too far.
And I think, would you say your journey has been a process, and it wasn't like something that the light just came on and boom, you were there, right?
Yes, it is not linear. there's been a lot of ups and downs and hoops and loops, and times where you start to question, is it all worth it? And then you take 5 steps forward and you can breathe again and you go, okay, yes, it's worth it. You just have to continue to chip away at it. But what I've learned is honing in on some of these skills and some of these tactics, you're able to, when things come at you in real time, you're able to tackle them in real time so that they don't get added to the backlog. That way you can continue to work on the backlog, if that makes sense.
And it still shocks me, and I've been doing this now for 4 years with first responders. It still shocks me that so little is taught at the academy level regarding this. What needs to change to make that a priority with agencies?
I've thought about this a lot because I mostly train at agencies with people who are seasoned, or maybe they've only got a couple of years on, and it's easier to talk to them because they have the lived experience. I think it's hard to train somebody who hasn't experienced any of it yet, and say, preemptively, hey, this is what you're going to experience and this is what you can do to combat it. Partially that's, a challenge. The other challenge is they don't care because they don't know yet. They're like, let me get in there, let me chase the bad guys. And I think one way to combat it is to reframe it. So I love bringing the science to it because it makes it helps people to understand it better. It helps them to make sense of it and feel more comfortable with it, because it's really, a lot of it is just body and brain science when you break it down. And I think that doing that would maybe help it to help people to connect to it a little bit better. But it's got to be more than just an hour check the box kind of actions, even within agencies, because we're losing people left and right, and we're losing a lot of people to their own hand, and it's so preventable, but we have to be able to stay proactive on it.
Yeah. I just saw a Facebook post, I think it was yesterday, and it was an officer who, end of watch, and he was a year in.
Yes, I saw that too.
And it's like, wow, what went wrong there? That here's this young person who, 1 year in to doing this work ended his own life.
Yeah.
That's.
And I think too, nobody comes into the job with a clean slate. We all come into the job with a lifetime of things, and it could be anything, and it could just be that, the stress of the job just was just a little bit too much. And maybe it wasn't the job at all. Maybe they just had family issues or personal issues and they just happened to be an officer as well. We locally here, less than 2 weeks ago, lost somebody. He just retired last year after 22 years of service. And, you think about guys like that too. So you think about it on both ends of the spectrum. Like, you made it, you're done. And it just still stuck with him. And, I had the honor of working in an adjacent department with him. And, he was one of the last people you'd expect, but you just never know.
So what's the solution?
I don't know if there's a blanket answer. I think certainly there are things we can do culturally to shift the stigma. We talk about the stigma all the time. There are things we can do on the administrative level to get the training in front of the right people. Ultimately, and I hate to say this, but ultimately, if somebody, even if they know all the resources and they have all the tools, if they're not able or willing to connect with themselves, there are things we can do. There's a lot of things we can do, but it's sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's nothing we can do. And I hate to say that because that sounds so negative, but it's the truth.
Well, I look at the story. So in our film, we had Nicole Ford, who's a dispatcher, and she took her own life back in August, and she had 1,000 people she could have called.
Yeah.
Literally, she had 1,000 people that cared about her, and I think the only way we could have stopped that is we were physically in the room.
Yeah.
And
I think that's what I mean, when it comes down to it in the end, when you're in a state that you're willing to not be in this life anymore, you can't see that. Even if you know it logically, you're not able to see past it. And I'm one of the lucky ones that was experiencing, teetering on that edge, and something just pulled me back. But there's a lot of people that, they get past the point of not being able to pull themselves back. And, but there's a lot of things we can do to prevent people from getting that far.
Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of questions I want to ask you, but
Yeah.
the first one is, what do you think we as a society, as citizens, me as just a normal average citizen, what can we do to help make a difference?
Oof. That's a great question. I don't know that I've really thought about that on a big level like that. Letting law enforcement and first responders know that you support them, I think, is a huge thing. There's a lot of law enforcement that feel like nobody cares about them as a human being. But maybe if people feel called, there's a lot of nonprofits out there that, if they have the means to throw $20 at them, that there's a lot of nonprofits that do a lot of good work. And,
Mm-hmm.
they provide mental health services to first responders, or trainings to first responders, or, God forbid something happens, I think it's tunnels to towers. They'll pay your mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different organizations that are so helpful, that, if you do have the means, that's a great way to start. If not, just, let people know that you appreciate their work.
Mm-hmm. And that's something I think that all of us can use at time,
Mm-hmm.
to feel appreciated is huge.
Right.
I know when I get, a thank you from someone, even for making the film or for a podcast episode or whatever, it means so much.
Yeah.
And it kind of keeps us going. And even just a little vulnerability here. This morning, I was really struggling. I was like, man, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I
Mm.
really being effective? Is this, is it working? Is it, am I being effective in the work that I'm doing and putting all this effort to do the podcast and show the film and all these things, And so I had this negativity started to creep in, and so getting words of affirmation from anyone, means a lot.
Yeah.
And I think, especially when you're in law enforcement, especially these days with the way the culture has been, and defund the police and all this stuff, I think that it would even be more important to let our law enforcement members know that, hey, we appreciate you.
Yeah.
And
Because
I know
ultimately,
every time, I mean, even I know you and I connected on TikTok, and so I follow a couple people on TikTok that are in law enforcement, and I'll get in the chat and I'll just say, hey, thanks for your service,
mm-hmm.
you know. And I don't know if that does anything for them, but it kind of helps me to make that connection with them.
Well, and I think it does. There's, like I said, so many people that think that citizens in general, they make like blanket statements that they just don't care. But if you can connect with them in a way that's recognizing that they're just human, and saying
Mm,
like, hey, I see you, I hear you,
mm,
that's all we really want as humans. We're tribal beings. We just want to know that we're
mm-hmm.
seen and we're heard and we're validated. That's it.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
goes a long way. And I think people shy away from doing it because it seems so small and insignificant. But a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times those small and insignificant moments actually make a really big impact. So yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's absolutely, another thing, is just validating and giving those words of affirmation.
Mm-hmm. I know you work a lot with agencies around the country, different things that you do, and you talk about burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of what is that, and why is that important?
So basically, I mean, and you can burn out of any career, but we have a really high rate of burnout in the first responder world for obvious reasons. That being, heightened stress, very traumatic situations that we're thrown into, odd shifts, um, then that puts strain on families and home life situations and sleep and all of those things. But ultimately, when somebody is burning out, all of these symptoms are very similar to that of sometimes PTS, sometimes compassion fatigue, but all of them kind of boil down to having a dysregulated nervous system. So experiencing, mental symptoms like irritability or feeling really snappy or edgy, having a short fuse, or being shut down and not being able to engage in the moment, all the way to physical things like chronic headaches, unexplained chronic pain, frequent illness, gut health issues, weight gain. It really runs the gamut. All of it comes down to having a dysregulated nervous system and not being able to really balance it out in a healthy way. So we get to this point, and then oftentimes we just kind of throw fuel to the fire and start smoking and drinking lots of coffee and not eating healthy and not sleeping, and because we're not healthy in our minds enough to make a healthy decision. One healthy decision leads to another. But when we're in a state of burnout, we've got like chronic fatigue happening and our brains are tired and our cognition is affected, which affects us on the job. And we need our first responders, and we need our first responders healthy. And so it's really important to me that, if I can help somebody stay in the job and get healthy while they're still in the job without having to leave, if I can do that, then I am happy to, help guide them through that, because I didn't want to burn out. I didn't want to leave the job. And now I've learned ways where I probably could have, and I there's still an urge to go back every once in a while, but I think my mission looks different now. And
Sure.
so yeah, it's really, I really love focusing on beating the burnout, because it's real easy to slip down that path.
What's one thing someone can do to start down that path of beating the burnout?
The very first thing that comes to mind is, and might sound silly, but breathing.
Wait, I breathe every day. I think.
Yes. Matter of fact, I think you're doing it right now. Yes. So proper diaphragmatic belly breathing, and it's so underrated, or overrated and undervalued, and people talk about it all the time. But truly, when you are experiencing an adrenaline dump, or multiple adrenaline dumps in a shift, you're releasing a ton of cortisol into your system. If you can take a moment to pause, relax your shoulders down, take a big deep breath in through the nose, let it fill your belly up, exhale through the mouth like you're breathing through a straw, slow down. You're going to kind of interrupt that cortisol release. And instead, you're going to release serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins, because you're activating your vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system. And so I know it sounds silly, but that is like the number one thing. If you can pause, take a pause, and then start to do that multiple times a day. And then you can focus on, getting your nutrition on track, getting restful sleep, making sure you're hydrated, and then working on all of the mental and emotional things. But you gotta pause, give yourself some breathing room, give yourself a little bit of grace, work on control the controllables, and then work on mental, emotional.
So what if you're an agency? Like I have a friend who works for a local sheriff's department, and they do swing shifts. He's days one week, the next week he's evenings, and the next week he's nights. So what if you're in that situation? What should you do and it's not going to change? I think right now they're trying to change that, but it hasn't changed in years. So who knows if it's going to change? So what should someone do in that situation that they're just getting beat up because of the odd shifts that they're working?
That's really, really tough, because your sleep is paramount to a healthy brain and a
Sure.
healthy body. Um, you know, meditation it's not a substitute for sleep, but it can
Mm,
help you get more restful sleep. And
mm,
I think the statistic is escaping me right now, but I want to say, 20 minutes of meditation is equivalent to like 4 hours of sleep. Now,
mm,
it's not going to give your body the rest that it needs, but it
mhm,
might help your brain refresh a little bit.
mm,
And then that will inevitably help you get more restful sleep when you do actually find some rest. But that can be very, very tricky. And that's why some of these jobs have such high burnout, because we're running our people ragged and their nervous systems don't have time to find balance and regulation, because they're just constantly bouncing into the walls, because you're not on a cycle. Our nature runs on cycles, and our bodies
mhm,
are part of nature. When
mhm,
you're screwing with that cycle constantly,
mhm,
it's very hard. So I would say control the controllables. Make sure that you
mhm,
are getting good exercise and movement, hydrating, flushing the cortisol out of your system, um, and good, nutritious food that's feeding your brain and your body. And, vitamins are also very underrated, but we're so depleted of vitamins and minerals in
mhm,
our regular diet,
mhm,
that it can really make a big, big difference. Just,
mhm.
a good multivitamin.
That's something I want to get into in a podcast. And if you have anybody that that's like a nutritionist or someone like that I could have on the show, I would love to have them to talk about that.
I do, and I will talk to you about that after. But
Mhm,
I have somebody that I've worked with that is a mental health nutrition coach, but
mhm,
she's also a certified therapist, and she works
mhm.
primarily with law enforcement and military. So yes, I will give you her information.
Oh,
She's
very cool.
phenomenal.
Very cool. Yeah, I think just in my own life, I've noticed. I know once COVID kind of hit, we started ramping up our vitamin intake just because we
Hmm.
knew we needed these vitamin D and all the things that kind of prevent some of these things, and we've continued that, and I'm so glad we have, and I think it's and I can say this honestly. I think I've had COVID, but I've never tested positive,
Oh.
which is bizarre. Yeah. I I think I've had it because I've been around it, but
Yeah.
I think because of all these vitamins, I don't know if maybe it's just my makeup or whatever, but I think those vitamins have helped me stay healthy.
Well, certainly. I mean, and that's a rabbit hole we could definitely go down. But I have done. I'm a hyper researcher, so like when I find something that I think is interesting, I learn all of the things. But
Hmm.
even uh, in our soil, we get our vitamins and minerals and nutrients from the soil that grows our food, and
Hmm.
all of that over decades and centuries in our farmland, all of the nutrients and vitamins and minerals are depleted. And so
Yep.
a carrot doesn't have the same nutritional value as it did 100 years ago. And I know it sounds
Yeah.
really strange, but if you have the ability to supplement that with a vitamin, then by all means, because our bodies are made to work with these nutrients.
Yeah. And it's a part of taking care of the whole being, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's spirit, soul, and body. It's every piece of us. And if one of those pieces isn't working right, then it's going to throw us off and get us into that burnout stage, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if we're not willing to acknowledge it,
Mm,
and just really avoid it and fight it because I'm good, I'm solid, that actually gets us into a lot more trouble, because the biggest threat to you is that which you do not perceive. And if you don't
mm,
acknowledge it to be a threat, it's going to be an even bigger threat. So you
mhm,
have to be able to look at yourself objectively and say what's not working, and then, make adjustments from there.
mhm. So let me ask you this. Why is it so hard to keep up with, I mean, it's easy to burn out from all the healthy stuff that I'm doing,
Yeah.
to keep working at it, to get up in the morning and do the workouts in fact, this morning I just totally bombed at that because I got thrown off because of this snafu with the podcast today,
Mhm.
and so I didn't get my workout in. So why is it so hard to be consistent, to keep up with all the things that we need to do to stay healthy?
Because our brain likes comfort. Our brain likes, a cozy blanket and it likes familiarity and what it knows. And so, we might feel motivated, which I don't love that word, but we might feel motivated to start something. And when we do, we might say, oh, wow, this does actually feel really great. And I'm feeling good about it. And, maybe we stick with it for a couple of weeks, but here's where my mega nerd status comes in. Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells us that once we kind of get the relief that we're looking for, our motivation falls off. We start to feel better and we go, oh, okay, I'm good. I don't need that thing. But it's the thing that's keeping you feeling good. So just like a lot of times when people, maybe they need an SSRI or they need some kind of a medication to adjust their brain chemicals, and they take them for a couple weeks and they're like, oh, I'm good. I don't need to take this anymore. Well, no, you feel good because you're taking it, right?
Right.
And so staying consistent it's a matter of discipline, because our brains are, if you've been doing something for a certain way for so long, your brain wants to go back to that, whatever that was. So if you didn't work out for 20 years of your life, the first 20 years, and then you start to work out at 20 years old, your brain's going to say, hey, we didn't have to used to do this. Even if you've been working out for 6 months, your brain's going to be like, hey, can we do that thing we were doing before where we just sit and play video games? So you have to just have the self-discipline and the fortitude to love your future self more.
And is it important to perhaps bring people around you that are also doing that?
1000%. Yes. And I think that's, what is that saying, that you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or something like that.
Yep.
And I think that, it's the conversations hit differently. The drive is there. You don't feel judged by people. You don't have people saying, well, you just think you're better than everybody, or silly little things like that. But on top of that, as human beings, our nervous systems kind of speak to each other in a way. So it's energy, but it's also nervous systems. And we have the ability to co-regulate with people. So if you are somebody who's trying to live a healthy life and you're trying to stay on a good moral compass and do things that are just, better choices for the future you, and you're spending time with people who are living in the moment, reckless, and just doing whatever they want to do, whether it's healthy or not, your nervous system is going to co-regulate with them. And I think that's another reason why law enforcement, and I would say especially corrections, really struggle with staying on track with things, because they end up co-regulating with people who are not making healthy life decisions. And so you have to be able to really focus and stay on track and have the discipline, like I said, to love your future self more.
Yeah, I think if you can even just be that leader who takes that first step and then brings someone along, just those 2 people can make a difference, within an agency. They can start that movement, right?
Yeah. I think it's like cracking an egg too, because I've heard people say, I didn't want to admit how bad I was feeling. And then I ended up going to the IAFF Center of Excellence. And, when I came back, I had 5 people waiting for me to get back so that they could tell me that they needed help too. And so once you crack that egg, people say, oh, I guess it is safe to speak up. It is safe to speak my truth. And, is it always going to be the case? I don't know. I would hope so. But, it just takes, like you said, it just takes one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you could go back and talk to your rookie self, what would you tell yourself?
If I can be real honest, I've not reconciled with that version of myself yet. I don't like her. I don't like her one bit. I would thank her for getting through the time that she did. But I would tell her to stop compromising who she is to fit in, to fit the mold. I would tell her to follow her heart and do what she knows is the right thing to do, for herself and others, versus letting other people make decisions for her. And I think a lot of rookies fall into that.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of rookies fall into that because, we look to seasoned people to tell us how to do the job and, or how to live our lives even. And that's not always it. That's not always where it's at.
Yeah. And sometimes those seasoned people are broken and like we just said, you kind of become who you hang out with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got me a little choked up there.
Well, thank you for being vulnerable. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think that we need more people like you who see where you've been and what could have been and are spreading that message and are really making a difference to help others. And I think that's the important work you're doing. And so what would you,
Thank you for saying that, by the way.
Of course. What's your big message to the people you get to speak to? What's your bottom line?
Just to stay true to who you are. My big, I don't want to ruin it, but, my big thing at the end of most of my speeches is to look around at one another and realize that we are our own safety net. We all are a strand in that safety net. And so we all have to commit to ourselves first. We have to commit to stay another day. We have to commit to loving our future selves more and doing the things that maybe we don't want to do, but they're the healthier thing to do. But until we do that for ourselves, we can't do that for other people. And we're quick to want to do that for other people, but we have to make sure that we're solid. We have to be a strand in our own safety net to then, weave together with other people to make our safety net all the way across the board. And so commit to yourself to do what you know that you need to do. Take the time to make yourself a priority because you're worth it.
And I think that is so important, even when an agency doesn't provide the resources and the tools to do that for yourself. You're still important. You still, you should take care of yourself first.
Yeah.
Like you said, I mean, you're still responsible for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I hear that a lot. Yeah. So I hear that a lot, well, my agency doesn't care. Well, do you care? You have to care more. Okay, yes, maybe you think that they don't care about you. Maybe they think they don't care about any of you, or maybe you think that they don't care about any of you. But you have to care more. Nobody is going to show up for you in your life for you like you are. You have to survive. You need to care about you and not put other people in front of yourself, because you can't. And I remember one of my sergeants actually yelled at me one time because I was going a little too fast running hot to a call, because one of my shift mates was calling out for backup because somebody had 2 machetes and he was swinging them around. And I was going a little bit too fast. And when we got there and the situation got under control, my sergeant looked at me and he said, "You're no good to him if you don't get there." And I was like, "Yeah, but I got here." And he's like, "But you were going way too fast." And I'm like, "I know, And so, rookie mindset, but he was right. You're no good to anybody else if you don't even get there. So you have to commit to yourself and make yourself a priority.
Yeah. So I live in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and we have a really amazing fire department here. It's mostly volunteer. And I've had the privilege of being on scene with them numerous times and watched them do their work and, put out a fire or rescue somebody out of a truck or whatever. And I asked, this was early on, this is maybe 6-7 years ago. I asked one of the guys, I said, "You guys just seem to you don't rush. You just go and do the work." He said, "Yes, because if we rush, then we make mistakes and then we're not good to help the people that need help." And it just really spoke volumes to me. When the big building's on fire, well, it's on fire, it's going to burn. It doesn't matter if we're, if we rush and try to put it out, we might get hurt and then the whole town's going to burn down,
Right.
But if we just take our time and put the fire out and do the things that we need to do, all the steps, not shirk our responsibilities, not skip steps,
right.
Do all the things that we need to do, then we'll be able to accomplish the goal.
And that is something that I hear that I used to hear from citizens in working with law enforcement, because we're there to be the calm in the storm. And people would be like, they would mistake that for us not caring.
Sure.
Well, why aren't you upset? Well, what good am I to you if I get upset? What good am I to you if I run around like a chicken with my head cut off? I have to be the calm in the storm. I have to, but the key here is to be able to do that for yourself.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we show up like we're the calm in the storm. So on the outside, we're displaying this stoic, I got this, I'm cool, under control, all of the things. And internally, we might be a mess. So it's a matter of actually calming that internal storm and doing that for yourself.
Wow. So much that we need to work on.
Yeah.
So much I need to work on to calm my storm that I've been battling this morning. So
we all have storms. We all have storms.
Yeah. So I really appreciate your work you do. How can people get in touch with you? How can they find you?
Well, first of all, thank you for your appreciation. It's a lot to be vulnerable like this, and but people can find me. Everything is linked up at akdozanti.com, and all of my socials are linked up there. Everything that I have going on, my free Lifesaver Academy app is up there as well, so you can explore some regulation tactics and techniques and stuff like that. And there's a lot of resources up in the app as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the program. Thank you for being vulnerable, and look forward to getting this out there to our audience.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Thanks, AK, for joining me today on the podcast. I really appreciate you. Be sure to check out today's sponsor, Central Square. If you want state-of-the-art tools for faster, more effective emergency responses, Central Square is your solution. And a big thanks to all of you who have taken time to listen, to watch, and especially those of you who have left a review. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't left a review, what are you waiting on? Please chime in. I want to be sure I'm bringing content to you that you want to hear, and so your reviews help me out a lot. And remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can always dial 988 for help. Be sure to tune in next week for another interview with an amazing first responder leader. Until then, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.